there's a real elegance and high quality to the projects in Auckland. I don't think everyone necessarily understands or fully appreciates how much effort goes into these places. One of the things was to drive great urban design outcomes across projects, because the public were angry with the quality of those scene 1, 2 and 3 apartments down on the waterfront back in the central city at the time. People were unhappy about that, and so we then developed a sort of an urban design strategy, which included things like the Auckland Conversations programs, because we felt that it was about lifting the narrative and building expectation. And there were global leading city thinkers all appearing in that, really bemoaning the quality of Auckland's planning, its urban design. I also remember an article by Simon Wilson, who was the main writer for Metro magazine, Auckland's Shame, Urban Design. And by 2016, we had been acknowledged in the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize. By 2019, there were more cranes on Auckland's skyline than any city in the whole of the US. And by 2021, it had become the world's most livable city. You know, from urban shame to global acclaim, it was a great journey, but it took time.
So my guest today is Ludo Campbell-Reid, the legendary design champion of Auckland from 2006 to 2019, who radically reshaped not only the look and feel, but actually the functionality of the central city of Auckland. Ludo had considerable urban design experience in London prior to his arrival, and has spent recent years working in public executive design and planning roles in the Greater Melbourne area. He now advises civic leaders across the globe on urban design and city infrastructure. Ludo, thanks so much for chatting with me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show.
So I'd like to start just by taking the audience through some of the work that you did with Auckland Design Office. It's really just going to be a small snapshot of a very wide portfolio.
You've been out with your camera, have you?
Right, and I've taken a lot of images from Google Maps under fair use. So there's actually a great resource. So there's a bit of a bias here towards streetscapes as opposed to...
it's harder to take photographs of bigger things sometimes, but you need a helicopter or a hot air balloon or a drone. So,
And so just start with some downtown cityscapes. So here we are with Fort Street, perhaps one of the more publicly sort of talked about projects. And as you can see, or for audio listeners, I'll describe these the images briefly, but narrow footpaths, rather grungy, people squeezed, very few cars actually on the road, but a lot of parked vehicles on the sidewalk. And then after the fact, just a much more open, inviting space. And as we'll see, a little bit of a theme, textured stone, use of textured stone, native plantings, steel and woodwork, unpainted woodwork, just varnished or oiled. Nice. Sort of the use there. And one of the things here, I'll invite you to just, anything that comes up as we go through these, please feel free to...
It's a trip down memory lane. It's obviously a beautiful day in Auckland, that day you took the photograph.
Not all like that.
Yeah.
This is from Google Maps.
Oh, that's why I can see Fort Street as the name on the right there, yeah.
But one of the most successful, I think, and maybe being relatively early in the ADO's work, I saw statistics online, and it depends on which periods you're comparing and so on, but there was something in the order of a 400% increase. 440% increase in consumer spending.
Hospitality retail spending.
Right.
And which is what that whole area was all about, hospo.
Sure.
But they clearly weren't spending much money on hospo.
Right.
So it was a huge change, and it wasn't just 40% or 14, which is often enough to convince people that something's a success. 400, it's actually 439, but rounded up to 440 increase. And so, from a place that initially people were kind of skeptical about the project, suddenly people were putting their hands up in Takapuna and New Lynn and different parts of because they saw the benefit. But it's not always applicable and easily applicable anywhere. You don't just kind of roll out a blueprint. You have to adapt for place and context, and that's the key. People don't often believe that or understand that, but you have to design for place, and not everywhere was ready.
Right, and that's a theme we'll actually come back
is it?
to.
Okay, right.
But just to kind of, again,
It's good.
give people a bit of an idea of the breadth of the work here. We'll flick through these
Elliott
next
Street,
few.
yep,
Elliott
yep.
Street, highly constrained, again, rather...
Underperforming.
Right, rather dated, and then the subsequent, full of alfresco dining, again, increase in pedestrian traffic and the types of activities occurring there.
From asphalt to alfresco. I mean, that was the dream, and the weather's good here in Auckland, and it's kind of the climate's conducive. And you go to Amsterdam and Copenhagen, and people sit outside with blankets over their legs, but they're out there in the snow. So if they can do it there, we can do it in Auckland, and we did. And the community and particularly the businesses really embraced the opportunity.
Sure. Here's the Chancery area with Freiburg Place. So a relatively limited number of, let's say, off-street gathering areas in the downtown.
Yes, that's right.
This is one of maybe only a few, if you exclude Albert Park, which is up the hill and not necessarily a place that you'd hike across town on.
Yeah, you'd have to walk up a hill to get there as the old volcano.
So this is maybe only one of three locations, and you can see bisected in 2009 by a rather ugly right-of-way. Again, similar themes here, heavy numbers of parked cars and congestion as a result of people trying to do parallel parking.
That was in O'Connell Street. Yeah, you're right. That's as you look north. If you look left towards the square, those bollards sort of they look like torpedoes from a submarine. Sometimes it's really isn't about architecture and landscape design. Sometimes cities, particularly the public realm, needs to recede and get out the way and be comfortable, non-slip, well-maintained. It shouldn't be colourful and bright. It should the people are the colour of a city, and the architecture around the spaces. So the more minimal you can design a space, the better it functions for all different types of things. And that space, you can see, how do you bring in event trucks to activate the street? How would you put out a platform if you wanted to have somebody playing the guitar? I mean, it's about providing multifunctional spaces, and often those that are stripped clear of all their paraphernalia are the ones that can be more, I guess, efficient and also get better value for money. So that was what we tried to do.
Interesting. Yeah, well, here's the after
there you go.
image.
Yeah.
And again, you can see there trestle tables underneath the memorial hall.
That's right.
And again, large increase in pedestrian activity. Here's
also, sorry, that one thing about that space, it's got a brilliant microclimate as well. It's got a fantastic aspect. The sun gets in there, and it's a really popular place. So it already had the bones, but you don't see it on those photographs. But definitely the square with the manufacturing and the actual of the water features were not well maintained at that time, and so that was all part of the story, was trying to repair and start to really put that into a much better frame. So it was really successful.
Right. So last of the streetscapes that I have here, this is Queen Street, the busiest and perhaps I don't know this for certain, but I could virtually guarantee it here now. The highest retail spend per metre in the country, perhaps the country's most important street.
The Golden Mile, yeah.
Right, and as you can see in this image, 4 lanes of traffic plus parking, while hordes of pedestrians on a admittedly bright sunny day being relatively cramped. And I recall as a child even, let alone as the population of the city centre's grown, but as a child you'd be or a teenager, weaving your way through crowds, and then meanwhile you've got sort of 6 or 7 cars. But this is an interesting one because it maybe gets into some topics we'll touch on later as well, but very much a staged approach from what I could tell. So here's 2020. There's been a reduction in the number of lanes, but you're still retaining a lot of of street parking. bus stops and so on. And then, unfortunately, the image the most recent image on Google Maps was a little bit more some foggy morning in the middle of winter, perhaps.
Yeah, not the best.
But you can see here that perhaps, would it be fair to say that to go to this single lane in each direction with occasional loading zones all in one go would have been a step too far? Is that was it quite deliberate in the way that this was over the course of decade or
Interesting.
more?
Yeah.
Staged?
I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer to that question, because sometimes you do need to go more slowly and sometimes you need to go more quickly. And sometimes you need to rip the Band-Aid off and get on with it. Other times you need to transition through the stages. But remembering that 2024 would be a time when Auckland and New Zealand had gone through, significant changes and impacts through COVID. Every city around the world was feeling the pinch. Most cities, I've been living in Melbourne for 5 years, and we were locked down for 2.5 years. So the changes that went through that, the impacts of that in every city around the world, you were mentioning about San Francisco, there are lots of places that have really struggled and they have had to come back. So Queen Street being the epicenter of the sort of the city of sales would have been impacted mostly by the impacts of that. You then putting in picture the cruise ships would have been less tourists in the city. Thinking about New Zealand, a country that had become the most productive part of the economy was the tourism economy. It overtook agriculture, I think, in the late in around 2018 or so.
Not actually most productive per se, but certainly largest.
Yeah.
So the most. Yeah, there's some interesting.
Okay, the nuances.
It's actually quite low labour productivity in the tourism market in terms of late per.
But it became the biggest generator of revenue in that respect. And so when you've got that as your main production of economy, you're actually, in fact, that's not the right word. When that becomes your main driver of that part of the economy, and that disappears, you struggle. And so that diversification of the economics of the country is all linked into this story too. You also have the City Rail Link, which was also one of the most game-changing projects in any city of this country, which is going to completely transform the mobility of Aucklanders. That was also happening at the same time. So It's a confluence of things, and so we had to stage it because of construction issues and keeping the city moving whilst it was undergoing the sort of the open heart surgery.
Right, yes. So now that you mention it, there's just immediately behind where this image is taken is Albert Street.
That's right.
Which
was open heart surgery. It was literally opening the body and revealing the inner workings of the body.
Enormous trenches.
Lifting the rib cages open and looking at the body inside there and really starting to build a new heart and a new sort of capillary system.
Interesting metaphor you use there, is of like the city as a human being or as a being. Is that something that you think of
all the time?
All the time, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting you picked up on that, but I originally wanted to be a doctor or a marine biologist. It was one of those two, and the doctor. I wanted to help. I wanted to heal and improve humans, people, but I ended up as an urban planner. But what I very quickly realised, Adam, was that the way we design, the way we plan, the way we construct, but also the way we govern cities will determine the health, the well-being, the happiness of humans, much more than I could ever have done as a doctor. And so I coin the phrase now that anybody who works in the built environment, like you, like us, architects, urban designers, engineers, we're actually in the medical profession. And people don't realise that. So some cities, some countries, some governments that link planning and health together are smart. I was in Perth last week and they have a Minister of Planning and Health. It's a really good thing. The more we walk, the more we get on public transport, the healthier we are. So city doctor is sort of what people are starting to say to me. And so I look at a city as a patient. Some are really happy and some are really healthy, but some aren't. And so you prescribe the medicine.
Right. And I suppose this is getting, again, a little bit ahead of what I'd planned, but it's an interesting, just to carry on down this road, we I've received a pushback from some of the audience around urbanist ideas and some of the lectures I've given or some of these talks. And I think, to use your metaphor there is occasions when the right medicine and the wrong situation is what people perhaps are objecting to, right?
Right.
There's some occasions where, you've got heavy amounts of existing pedestrian traffic and maybe an even greater latent demand for, pleasant places to walk about.
Yeah.
And then these sorts of solutions are, you see outsized returns.
Right,
or I'm not sure what the medical metaphor would be in this situation, but to apply that same medicine in a situation where maybe there isn't that latent demand, maybe that's where perhaps you get
challenges.
Challenges arise.
Gosh, well, it's there's good and bad dentists, and there's good and bad doctors, and there's good and bad urban designers. But ultimately, one is trying to help. One is trying to do the best that they can. We are trying to improve life, improve public life, make cities more healthier, make streets more safe. The agenda is about improvement and well-being and connectivity of humans. That's what the agenda is, and sometimes people get it wrong. And I think there's also the impact of getting it wrong are big impacts, and so you have to be clever and thoughtful and smart about how you do it. And so there are many tools available to an urban planner or an urban designer. But what people don't realise is that often people like me, we're not in charge. The people that are in charge are the people in charge of the big budgets and the engineering of cities. That's where the big decisions are made. And often people like me in organisations are sniping at the edges. We're trying to influence those bigger agendas because that's how cities have been built for many, many years. And if you think about Auckland, it was a city in the 1950s that had almost the highest public transport patronage per head of capita in the whole world. It was the poster card of mobility with the trams, the ferries, walking and cycling even. I mean, Christchurch was a cycling city. But urban designers didn't build the motorways that looped around Auckland that made it, by 2005, have the highest ownership of cars per head of capita in the whole world. The urban designers and planners didn't plan. That was done by traffic planning and engineering. So the point I'm trying to make is that city making or place making, which is a new word that seems to have come up, is really a team sport. And so what you need is people that can speak the language of the different disciplines and how we come together to solve the problems. And so I'm not a city doctor on my own. All the decisions that I made or tried to make or tried to influence were done with collaborative conversations with the best minds around the table, and some mistakes were made, but a lot of the projects that we have taken photographs before and afters, they're better than they were before. The city is better off than it was for the changes, and so we are constantly trying to improve the patient, and it's all done for the right agenda. It's not about ideology, it's about professional views on a city. And so that's really the main aim of what urban design is, or good urbanism. And yes, there are mistakes, but I think that the private sector is allowed to make mistakes. Public servants maybe aren't allowed to make mistakes because it's public money, and I think that that's a really important differentiator. But I would like to see more
less choice as well, to be fair. The public can choose between different private industries, different products, and they don't necessarily have that same choice for public spaces.
Great, yeah, that's exactly right. So the pressure is there so we rigorously check and vet everything. But I do think that cities would be better if there was more prototyping, trying it out before you buy it, rather than jumping from a plan, a vision, right the way through to a $10 million rescape of the street.
Right.
Would be nice to almost trial it in a prototype or a tactical pilot way, ask the community what they think, make adjustments, and then build, and use that temporary moment as a consultation exercise, because the public get involved at the beginning, and then the next time they try it, they have to buy it because it's permanent, and that takes time.
Yes. we're covering an awful lot of different ground.
I've probably
here.
got a bit broad there.
It's a response. Let's stick to that for a moment.
Response to your question.
Let's stick there for a moment, and then I'd like to get on to talking, just to give people, because we've only talked about streetscapes so far. So there's master planning work and all kinds of
there's a lot of layers to this, Adam.
Right. So just on that note around trialing before you buy, one of the things that perhaps a fundamental tension there, or not necessarily fundamental, but certainly a tension, is this idea of traditional transport infrastructure, or just infrastructure development in general, being very much a waterfall type process.
Oh yeah.
And there's, if we just think of a waterfall as we start on, defining requirements, and then we move through to narrowing the scope, and then we move through to, contracting and so on.
Yeah.
And then eventually delivery, and we're not revisiting changes at each stage. And the Platonic kind of opposite of this was something sometimes called agile, although that's a word that's sometimes tactical, is this idea of where you go and you throw something out there, and actually it's a living project that maybe you're adjusting every day. And I certainly, my experience with successful, let's say, cycleway projects, both ones that I've delivered myself and then observing elsewhere, is the ones that are successful are the ones that do their best to understand what the community needs are, start with that latent demand that I was talking about, of course, but then are delivered in such a way that whenever there's a pain point that comes up, are able to be adjusted before that starts to fester in the minds of the public. There's a, let's say, a loading zone that's being impacted, and suddenly, there's a business owner who's irate, and he's got the ear of the mayor and so on. And if you're in a position where you've already laid down concrete, well, there, we see sometimes what happens as a result of that. Toronto, for example, the mayor ripping out all of these cycleways. Whereas if you can go in there, you hear complaints, or maybe on the positive side, praise, and reinforce the things that are working well, and change those that are working poorly. I think that's a natural approach to change in terms of maintaining public capital, political capital throughout the
and
project.
social capital, community capital, trust. Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it's a really difficult profession at times to be in, because you are disrupting people's lives. Everybody wants progress, but nobody wants change. And the people that often complain are the people that don't actually use the thing that you're talking about. Sometimes they're people who are retired, don't have that much on the plate, and they've got time to comment and criticize, and they are articulate, and they are connected, and so they are able to navigate through to the top levels of organizations, and able to create a level of insecurity in the decision making process. Yet there are thousands of people who are absolutely fine with the project, who just assume it's going to happen. But because of a few loud voices, there's a tendency to sometimes knock the confidence and knock the energy out of a program because of a few, when actually the majority would be in support. And I guess sometimes it's about, that's why the before and afters, Adam, are really good, because people forget the pain. They then see, gosh, that does look better. But at the time, it doesn't feel like something they
road cones
want to be
and
part of.
Disruption.
Often the people that are going through the change don't necessarily benefit. Sometimes it's about the future. Right. And there's a really wonderful, proverb which I've often talked about, which is, society becomes great when old men and old women plant trees, the shade of which they will never sit under. And so there's a sense of long-term legacy about some of these things. They're not always about the immediate customer. They're about the future customer, some of which are not even born. And so, yes, we have to be clever navigators of this process. We have to be really good at communication, marketing, storytelling. You've got to have numbers on your side. You've got to have the head. You've got to have the heart, and you've got to build your support group. And that's what we did with some of the shared space projects. They were seen as people were very cynical initially, Adam, and people were really wedded to the car, and they thought that the car and car parking outside their restaurants or their shops was really the economic elixir. But they trusted us through the process. We consulted with the business community, and we pushed ahead with some of the programs. And it's interesting, by removing car parking down in those Fort Street areas, that drove better safety, it drove better retail, and as you said earlier, 440% uplift in hospitality takings when the people initially were very concerned about losing their car parks. So those businesses were supercharged by the change, and so it's really important to go back to them, to thank them, to work with them on the next iteration of that project.
Right. So, speaking of longer-term legacies as well, I'd like to give people a sense of some of the master planning work that you
beautiful.
did.
Wynyard.
Wynyard Quarter. So, again, my impressions of this place as a child growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, we're talking about empty lots, decaying industrial infrastructure.
Yeah.
You can see there's a rather grim image immediately next to some of the highest value real estate in the country.
Yeah.
Really in the midst here of a major housing crisis, and this land is just bare
and derelict. Yeah.
And derelict. And here's the same shot, same place.
Beautiful.
15 years later, 2024. Apartment buildings, cafes. There's actually quite large format office space in this area as well. I've got a few different images too.
This is a lot of this was the sort of the main producers of this was Willis Bond and Precinct Properties were the lead partner with this. Obviously Panuku at the time were the lead developer, the sort of the landowner, and this is high quality urbanism, and love it.
So I've got quite a few shots of this area because there's a lot of very interesting details to this. So one of the things I found really interesting reading through these documents was just looking at the changes that were made through the Auckland Design Office's work to allow additional height throughout the Wynyard Quarter, justified in design terms.
Yep.
One of the tensions that I see coming more and more common in, let's say, YIMBY circles at the moment is this idea of a tension between urban design on the one hand and yield, maximising a number of residential units on the other. What this particular, and maybe that is fair to say that those are in tension a lot of the time, perhaps, or at least on the margins. But one of the things I see that was really interesting about this was that the design work here was explicitly enabling additional density to occur, additional houses to be, or in this case, apartment buildings to be built. And by providing a really high quality place that people were going to be happy living in, that it was well connected, that was going to be beautiful, that was going to have commercial activity and so on, was what was used to justify and provide the political capital to enable that to continue, and then maybe even also be used as a template for more development elsewhere.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's always the word tension implies it's like the word conflict of interest. Conflict of interest is a good thing. You just have to, be aware of it, and to make sure that you provide the right sort of context around it and manage your risks. So but the idea that you mentioned, the tension, is never really a good and a bad thing. It's just simply, my view is that density is something that we need to be delivering more of in the right locations in cities around Australia, around New Zealand. And the moments where you can deliver better density are the moments where good design will be the precursor or the way to gain public acceptance of living at those slightly higher densities. And so the judgment call is made by the experts as to the heights of these buildings and what that impact of the height on the public realm, so the space between the buildings. We call that the theatre of public life. It's the space between the buildings, which is really what urban design preoccupies identifies itself with. And so there were instances where actually, I mean, it wasn't just the Auckland Design Office, it was the planning department of the council. I didn't run planning for Auckland, I ran the urban design programs, but we worked together with the team, and there are moments where on corners, at the end of intersections, you can just pop up, and that's very much a European urban design tool whereby you can celebrate important corners, important junctions on streets. Where there is space in front of a building, the building can be taller. But what you've got to think about always is about the light and the shade that gets either cast or removed by the development of projects. And so that's the domain of urban design, and there are very strict rules around that. The heights for the Wynyard Quarter were also justified by the views to the cones as well. The idea that Auckland's culture, its unique identity was formed by much of the cones. And so the removal of view shafts through two cones took away some of the character of Auckland. And so it was important to respect all that. And it's a complex jigsaw puzzle or equation of how to make that work with yields, with heights, and to get the developer the development response that they need in terms of profits. Because what you want to do is you want to ensure a developer can do another one and another one and another one. You don't want to achieve a poor outcome, which means they can't build the next project. And so you try to work together as a team.
Sure. How familiar are you with the cone view shafts? Is that an area that you were...
Not in detail,
okay.
but it drove and does drive the shape and form of the central city in terms of the shafts from various areas. And some shaft views are seen from a driving car, which isn't the most exciting view of a city in the world. There has been a review of those shafts and where those are appropriate or not. But I remember working in London, and a view shaft towards St Paul's Cathedral, which is a 12th century building, not a...
Yeah, it's an interesting one though, that there's one particular view shaft that controls the heights of quite a bit of the western CBD, over towards Victoria Park and so on, and indeed Wynyard Quarter here. And the view shaft was designed or initially implemented to preserve the view of Mount Eden, Mangawhau, from the queuing the toll booths across the Harbour Bridge, which are
my point exactly.
long since removed.
Yeah.
So, but the rule remained on the books, and I may or may not be, but it certainly through this period remained on the books. So, sort of an interesting one where maybe old rules aren't necessarily given quite the level of scrutiny that they need, but certainly in general.
Yeah, it's a democracy at the end of the day. The job of people like urban planners working for governments is to give frank and fearless advice based on professional judgment and professional experience. The ultimate decision makers will be the politicians. That's their call. And this is a very contentious issue that the community would have spoken about. That's why I mentioned earlier about the culture of Auckland, or the character is probably a better word, of Auckland is defined by its cones. That's the sense of it. And anything that impacts on the view or the sense of that would be something which people would struggle to approve or allow. And so there would have been reviews upon reviews of that issue, and the decision at the time is where it stands. But it does hold back a lot of development opportunities to that side of the city. And when you do see the city from certain angles, you see the cutout almost where the projection of height into that cone corridor is not allowed. But there are often little moments where it does poke up into those spaces. So it's never perfect, but you put forward the best ideas.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it's probably unfair to push you on this issue because it's.
Well, it's clearly you've done some research.
Yeah, where it's not.
So I probably should stay clear of the conversation. But I think it sits within the history of the place.
Sure.
And so any changes to that is often seen as an assault on the character of the very essence of the place.
Yeah, I just want to leave aside this particular issue of that particular view shaft. I wonder, just coming back to something you said earlier though, where the squeaky wheel of about streetscapes that can maybe you say that retired or time rich and able to engage with a particular development much more easily.
Well, everything. It's not just the streets. It's development. It's city building in general.
Right, indeed. So if we apply the same logic to the idea of a really obscure rule that sits in page 600 of a lengthy unitary plan, that maybe they value, and that's perfectly reasonable. But on the other hand, the people that harmed, let's say, by that rule are all the people that would have lived or built businesses in those, that additional height in those apartments, but that don't get that opportunity because they were never, it's never been enabled. So I guess I just wondered if you did have any comment about the sheer scale of planning and the complexity of planning. How do we enable the voices of people that are maybe just wanting to kind of get on the housing market, let's say, to be kind of inputted into that process? It seems that sometimes a bit of a lack of a cost benefit or a broader economic analysis of some of these quite arcane rules. I don't know if you had.
Yeah, I am just thinking about that. There was I think the infrastructure New Zealand team have done some work, some really good cost benefit assessments of those sorts of rules, and I think there are probably thousands of rules in every city that probably should have that analysis done. But as I said, at the time when they're constructed, those rules, they are done with the best intentions, but perhaps haven't got the right people around the table to really understand the disbenefits and the benefits, or the trade-offs that one is making. And often, it's left to people perhaps without those skill sets making those calls. But I think often with cost benefit, I've seen projects that have a very low cost benefit get approved.
Sure.
And I've seen really wonderful projects with a really high cost benefit ratio that don't get approved. So at the end of the day, it often is a judgment, and often it's political, and often it's influence. And at that point, you do the best you can with the tools, with the information you have at hand, and there are mistakes made, but you do your best every day to kind of heal, to help, to repair.
All right. Well, so just going back to continuing to sing your praises and that of your team on Wynyard Quarter.
Sorry to jump in. I just was thinking about Wynyard Quarter. If there's a story, it's about from petrol to people. It's the removal of those large petrochemical sort of towers on the Wynyard Quarter, which are now all down.
To the very next slide.
Okay. I was sorry. You just triggered me with a sort of thinking. And the remaining few are the ones that will stay, but actually the majority are down, and really provides that opportunity for the future. So interesting.
Yeah, so you can see here exactly what you've just described. Enormous, great, big, wide streets for very little on them. But here's the exact same location now.
It's stunning, isn't it?
The work that
Panuku and Waterfront Auckland and many of us worked on for years.
And interesting, nice touch retaining just almost those architectural features and the nod to the heritage of the place, of those tanks, where the majority of them that are going to impede other uses of that space are gone. Yeah. But still, I've seen art projects using these tanks for projection,
the silos
purposes and so on.
They've been projected onto, absolutely. Could be an art gallery, could be museums of the future. It depends on how you adapt these things. But isn't it interesting? The photograph, it's really beautiful. I mean, the work there's a real elegance and high quality to the projects in Auckland. I don't think everyone necessarily understands or fully appreciates how much effort goes into these places. The teams, the consultants that we work with, that we procure through really complex procurement processes, these people care deeply about the place. And I walk around and I just think, wow, that's good, and this stuff will last. It's not just built for the next 10 years. It's going to last. The paving is incredibly well delivered and well established, and it will be there for 50 to 100 years. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of this quality work. So sorry, it sounds a bit defensive. I'm just actually being triggered by the beautiful designs of the work of the teams.
I mean, speaking personally, having taken my kids down here, a lot of these photos from Google Maps aren't, they're middle of a Tuesday.
Yeah, they're not judged.
Kids
in
are
any
at
way.
school,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
certainly I've seen this space absolutely crowded on any
Cranking,
day, even a day like today. But a little bit of sun or on the weekend, and this is just covered in families.
Beautiful.
And just one last shot from the same
That's Pakenham Street.
Pakenham Street, same sort of story, empty, decaying warehouses and empty lots.
Yeah.
And then now home to hundreds of people and lovely spaces, and there's a playground here just to the right of shot. And I guess now is as good a time as any to just dive into a little bit more to some of these design features. There's very much a coastal theme that comes through in a lot of these sites, with the use of water features and coastal native plantings, Pohutakawa, Nico palms, the sorts of things, plants that would have perhaps been in the space or would be in the space if it were like that. If it were like this, I believe some of this is reclaimed land, but
it's all, so everything's reclaimed right all the way back to Victoria Park.
Right.
So this whole reclamation was once water.
Do you know when that happened? Was it sort of turn of the century or 1920s, something like that?
Yeah. I think there was it was all part of a plan, I think, by a chap called Hammer, I think was the engineer who the sheds. There were the sheds on Queen's Wharf were all part of that era of reclamation, and so this land was is contaminated or was contaminated. There's been a lot of work done to repatriate that and to clean that up, and that goes back to the point about being a doctor, doesn't it? You know, how healthy was this as a place of machinery, of oversized, large sort of chemical warehousing and large-scale projects, fences with barbed wire, keep out signs, a place that the community, the public would never even go to. And it was also quite far from anywhere as well, and it was on the waterfront, which is often quite windy and quite cold and damp. And so I think what's been done here, it's remarkable. It reminds me of, some of the work that's been done in Hamburg, which is one of the great waterfronts of the world. The team and Aucklanders should be really proud of this stuff. And, looking at the beautiful greenery, that is indigenous native plants that are celebrating Tamaki Makaurau, the city of 1,000 lovers. I mean, to me, I get excited, I get emotional, because it's hard, this stuff, but if you do great design, it enables great decisions, and hopefully the mayors and the councillors of all cities around the world build a level of confidence that it's been through good design review processes, and the outcome is going to be far better than it ever would have been had it been just allowed to go out to free market. So partnership is the key.
Sure. So if we draw some general themes here, we'd say use of local stone, so often granite or bluestone.
That's right.
Steel, exposed wood, native plantings, some degree of vertical levels to create visual interest.
Yeah.
I think, if anything, I would say this has been so successful. GPT, I hadn't actually found any name for this word. GPT suggested contemporary Pacific modernism.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Which I think is a good title as any. But it's an interesting thing I'm seeing is that this style seems to be very much the standard now, and maybe as a consequence of how great the work that you did was. But I see it in places like Taihape in the central, like Palmerston North. It seems to me NZTA, the transport agency, is a sort of, we'll go ahead and an alternative to contemporary Pacific modernism might be Ludoism. So we'll go and we'll apply the Ludoism. Boom, there we go. That's the design taken care of. I don't know if it always has the same attention because it's seen as successful and in the blueprint. I think where it doesn't come off, there's not the same attention to the user's perspective. How are people actually going to use this space? What kinds of opportunities is the space going to provide for them?
Yeah.
And there's this lovely thing you said earlier, coming back to the Freiburg Place, where you talked about you really almost providing a template or a stage. I'm not sure exactly the metaphor you used.
That's right, yeah.
But for other people to make use of that area. So it was deliberately pared back a little bit from what could have been a very, egotistical, almost possible,
that's right. Yeah.
So, but instead, we're without that same level of attention to detail, I think you can get some creeping errors start to form in where there's, a lot of the same kinds of elements, but there's no space for people in it. Is that something that you saw in Melbourne? Or
look, it's a really clever observation, and I don't really have the best answer apart from the projects that we designed were designed for place. They're designed for culture, for the people, for the environment, for that context. And you absolutely shouldn't just blueprint the idea and transplant it somewhere else. The concepts and the principles can be transplanted, but the application and delivery through the materiality should be different depending on place. Otherwise, the sense of place making and context is irrelevant. And one of the things that urban designers do is it's all about place and about the context. So the good ones look at the place, look at the stories that are wanting to be revealed, look at the history of a place, look at the users of that place, both current and future, and design for context and for the people and for the customer. And that's probably a better word, actually. Who are the customers of this place? What is the place asking for us to do? And you mentioned about the gardens. These are rain gardens as well, so they're there to deal with stormwater issues. For many, many years, stormwater was simply just disgorging into the harbour, and the Watamata which means sparkling waters, was a harbour that was so beautiful. It was full of mussel beds, and the mussels cleaned the water. So the whole concept of health and well-being was being decimated by this poor stormwater management system. So this project and these projects are all about cleaning the water before it disappears back into the harbour. And so these level changes are actually retention areas where water is held, cleaned before it then passes through. So it was all about place and context. And so sometimes people copy. That's a very lovely thing. People do copy, and that's good. But it's about the principles. So longevity, anti-slip, access for people with disabilities, easy to walk, not too many cobblestones, not too bumpy under feet. All those things are about building projects that will last 50 years and 100 years, and in 100 years' time they'll still be in good condition. And so that's the principle. And so design is really not a aesthetic thing for me. It's actually about function. And I think people get design wrong. They think that design is subjective. For me, good urban design is based on fundamental principles of good cities and what people want. Design is subjective and can be different things to different people, and I think that's where sometimes we trip up. So what we wanted to do in Auckland was have a canvas, a more, if I say the word bland, as I said earlier, I believe the city is a stage, is like a theatre, theatrical performance. The colour comes from the props, the sets, the music, the people. If you then had a stage that was full of different colours, you'd be distracting from the actual energy of the place, which is the people. And so I believe every public space should be more modest, should be in the background, and the people then are in the foreground. And if this is last 50 years, that's actually about money. Good design. If you think good design's expensive, you should see the cost of bad design, having to replace it over and over again. So those are the principles: longevity, anti-slip, great for accessibility, for disability, good for people with visual impairments. These are the reasons why we design great places, and those then morph into the product that you see. But yeah, it's not subjective. It's not a whim. It's not a taste thing. It's about robust, functional places, and that will stand the test of time. So I believe this will save money in the long term.
Right.
So those are the views I guess I have. So yeah, interesting question.
Right. Moving on to New Lynn Master Plan. So this is this little midwestern part of the city. This particular master plan was predated both the ADO, the Auckland Design Office, and indeed the Super City.
Gosh, you did your research. Right. Yeah.
It's quite an interesting test case, perhaps, of where the similar kinds of things maybe didn't come off for one reason or another. But we can see, so this is precinct plans.
Yeah.
One just minor point, one statistic here that's quite interesting to me is that whereas the city centre had, in the time, these streetscape upgrades we're talking about, we've talked about the precinct master plan Wynyard Quarter, was taking place in amongst a wave of massive population growth within that relatively small area of Auckland where the CBD is ringed by the motorways. Something in the order of, depending on the time frame, but doubling, tripling. There's 40,000 people now living in that within that area. Whereas this particular location, and this is 2010, we're really still in the midst of a major, right in the thick of major housing and affordability problems and so on. But we're talking about 13 hectares of this particular area, but only 120, maximum of 120 residential units being provided.
Right.
And I wonder if, and we'll just flick through the next couple of slides here, you can see there was enormous, so this is 2008, a great big wide intersection, Great North Road, and then heading through towards Lynmore. Enormous public investment. So the new bypass put in to the right of image here. Similar kinds of design treatments that we see in the centre of image, Nico palms, stonework, low curbs, slower pedestrian environments. But perhaps what we missed was the pedestrians. Obviously, there's a not necessarily obviously, but there's a large mall immediately to the behind this image, Lynmore. But many of the shops that I was doing a survey of are still vacant despite the treatments. And there was really only this one, you could see to the centre right of image, large residential development that occurred. And the rest of it, very little upzoning. And perhaps, and here's just some aerial photographs, you can see enormous amount of work done, enormous amount of public investment, actually very beautiful streetscape environments.
Yeah, they are.
But when we compare 2009 aerial here with the 2025 aerial, still, in fact, many areas are less developed now than they were 16 years ago. We can see to the centre, bottom centre of the image here, large empty lots. I just wondered if there was any insight you could share on how this all went down, if there were lessons learned from the process, or...
Interesting question. I mean, I've sort of... The New Lynn Master Plan was I think it was quite a seminal document, actually. It was a really beautifully prepared city centre master plan of its time, I think 2008 or 9, I can't remember the exact date, and prepared by some really talented people that I know really well. And it definitely helped the framework for our city centre master plan for Auckland. And what was really good about the super city, and there were many things that were good about the super city, but one of them was being able to build a sort of a playbook of best practice. So we were able to bring the best of the North Shore councils and Waitakere and Auckland City Council at the time, and bring the best skill sets, the best ideas. And I believe we melded those into the teams that then took on. And so I inherited some of the work that was done. And this was a really good piece of really forward-thinking work that really thought about New Lynn as a very different place. And I think part of the challenge with cities is seeing having vision is seeing the invisible. And so these projects were really looking forward in terms of what was currently the status quo and how to change that. And then the dynamics come, which is economy, housing markets, inflation, rates rises or not. All these things play out into the management of the public realm and the way in which the super city organised itself around place teams. You've got to look after places. You've got to be chasing these things down. The city centre of Auckland really had a very big focus on it. And so sometimes in other parts of the region, there wasn't that same level of focus because there just wasn't the resources to provide. And so I don't know about where that is today. I haven't been out there today. I don't know where things are at with things. I'm here just to do a tour of the city centre and the waterfront, but it's hard to comment on something I don't know too much
Fair
about.
Fair enough. I guess then a more general question would be, are there some things that you worked on that you maybe championed during your time as the design champion that you think in retrospect, I wish I'd done differently, or that didn't come off, we had the wrong assumptions?
That's an interesting question. You know what? I often wish I'd pushed harder, to be quite honest, but I didn't. As much as I have, innate confidence, it's often it's a tricky thing to push against a lot of other people's views that I may or may be wrong. And so often I felt that I remember sort of with Queen Street, for instance, I really wished I'd pushed a bit harder earlier on to really pedestrianise some parts of that. But this is a really, you're not responsible for everything. You have to work with colleagues and so forth. And there are people that I learned a lot from, expertise in the transport areas and the architecture teams. I learned from them. But I think there were moments where I didn't push hard enough because I wasn't confident enough to push. I didn't have the support structures behind me to get these projects over the line. And so, but towards the end of my time or in the middle of my time, the super city gave me extra wings, a bit more air cover to get to really propose quite ambitious ideas and to put them on the table. And ultimately the staff, the don't make decisions. It's all about what the councillors want. And ultimately you provide them with the opportunity to think big or think more modestly. And so we put all the options in front of people, and the outcomes are what they are. But yeah, I probably had more confidence at the time. I would have pushed harder on a few things.
Okay. So this is my last image. And
it's a beautiful Myers Park. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah,
and I recall this particular location. Again, as a child, it was incredibly unsafe, shall we say. Underpass that was kind of my mother shied me away from as a kid. And, an interesting use here of lighting is one of maybe the exceptions to the general rule you talked about earlier of the modesty. I wonder, where there's this location, there's Fort Lane, there's quite dramatic lighting projects that you were either championed or involved in. The Harbour Bridge as well, although that's a slightly different story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here, you've turned a grungy underpass in the central city into a place where, and just out of shot, when I took this image, there was groups of young people sitting around playing cards and so on.
Were they? That's good.
And having a great time. And there's but here you've created through the use of light something that clearly young people feel safe being in. And I just wonder, nighttime, the attention to perhaps the nighttime or darker spaces and lighting them dramatically, is clearly quite a deliberate choice from the design office?
Absolutely. This project, I've been gone I'll be 6 years in January, and I really feel that the last 5 years has been quite incredible. I don't think everyone always fully appreciates how much change has actually occurred, and I think that telling that story of change is a really important part of the work that needs to be done by councils and governments, is explaining what's happened, taking people through that journey. So I don't know the details of this artwork, but I know many people who are involved, as I still, I love Tamaki Makaurau, I know people here and they tell me and they send me photos. So I know who's been involved, and I think it's incredible. It's out of this worldly almost. And I think the other thing I would say with cities is that they're often designed by men. And I've noticed over the years that often men are in very important positions generally. There's CEOs and there are heads of transport departments are often male engineers. But cities are more than just men. They're men and women and children. And I think that more women designers, more women leaders at the top table will deliver us better cities. It's not just a male and female thing. It's just about having skill sets and knowledge. And I don't think that we can walk in a park or a public space as a man and feel how a woman feels in that space. Very different. And so urban designers have always been trying to understand how you design cities. You ask the customers. And so if you design a place that supports children, it generally is it's a good litmus test of whether a place works or not. And so this place, this end of Myers Park, and Myers Park is really beautiful. It's got great aspects, wonderful light, wonderful sun. But at that end of that throat was a place where people were hanging out that you would really literally run the gauntlet as you went through there. And so the teams have lit that place up, opened the desire lines, opened the view shaft, opened the corridor, built this wonderful artwork, which then provides light at night. I mean, it's even quite a nice photograph in the daytime. So imagine at night. I would love to. I'm going to go back tonight now. You've made me think, but I'll go and take a photograph and maybe send it to you. But I think lighting is a really clever way to sort of manipulate the environment of a space. You know, even in our houses, depending on the lighting of your lounge, you can make that room feel more homely, more sophisticated, more commercial, just by toning the light. So I think light in cities is a very a powerful part of the toolkit.
Right. So you mentioned before the idea of pushing harder, and we've flicked through my presentation now and give people a bit of a sense. But I'm just going to very quickly list some of the other, because this is all just as by way of example of a much broader portfolio.
There's hundreds of things.
Right. Yeah. You know, with Osborne Street, Newmarket, Derby Street, downtown, Masterplans through Takapuna and Hobsonville Point, the whole Britomart area, a whole suite of parks and squares, Altair Square that you're involved in,
Manukau City Centre,
St Patrick's Square, Devonport Wharf and Marine Square,
the library,
the beaches, the access to, and there's a theme there. I think Judges Bay would be another one.
Beautiful,
really returning access to the water is a big theme. But I guess where I'm going with this, and one of the things that I'm starting to get the sense that maybe you don't appreciate quite how extraordinary this all is. Maybe you do, but I personally find the scope of what you've managed to achieve here incredible. When, as a public servant, I'm proud of what me and our teams have delivered, but gosh, every one was hard. Every project,
every win is hard. Yeah,
right. And here at the time, you know, we had some really top people, and we'd look up in Auckland yet again, just Ludo's notching up another win. And
it's not just me. I did conduct a lot of the changes, but I've this is city buildings are a team sport, and I have skills, but I employed the best people in the world to work for me, and I started with 3 or 4 people. By the end of it, we had 70 of the best urban designers in the world, I believe, the best urban design team globally. And we were on everything. We had the ability, we had the bandwidth to be out there. But we were small, but we were effective and we were influential. And so it was never about one approach, Adam. It was about understanding that design-led was something that the community wanted. I was brought in under Dick Hubbard's reign as the mayor of Auckland at that time.
Auckland City in particular.
Auckland City Council. And the idea, he set up a mayoral task force on urban design, and one of the things was to drive great urban design outcomes across projects, because the public were angry with the quality of those scene 1, 2 and 3 apartments down on the waterfront back in the central city at the time. People were unhappy about that, and so he established that process. And so what we then did, Adam, was we then developed a sort of an urban design strategy, which included things like the Auckland Conversations programs, because we felt that it was about lifting the narrative and building expectation by, people see what other cities do, they start demanding that at home. And so it was about education, raising awareness of what good looks like. And so, yes, the city could have been left as it was, but we decided to, through the support of the councillors, was to drive that design-led urban renaissance. And it literally, we prepared urban design panels. We also undertook a review of our own capital projects, because there's no point a city council saying, we want better design, if they don't do it themselves, if they don't lead by example. The private sector will look at you and think, oh, just a bunch of hotheads, we're going to carry on doing what we're doing. We ended up peer reviewing our own projects, and so that the private sector, when they see that we have raised the bar, they will raise the bar. And so the program is much more complex and sophisticated than people think. And it's right from strategy right down to delivery. And that is all down to, I guess, the choreography of all that. But I couldn't have done it by myself, and the team were brilliant. But we also then built an army of supporters out there in the community, because they became our allies. They were demanding better cities, and they demanded better of us. And so we lifted everybody together. I get emotional about it, because it's such a great project. 14 years is a long time to be in a job, and you blood, sweat and tears it, and you support and you work hard and you build this team. And we're all deeply proud, and the world, I guess sorry, I'm talking too much, but Auckland, there was an article, there's two moments. There was a movie by a gentleman by the name of Michael Tritt, who was a movie maker, and it was called Auckland, the City of Cars. And there were global leading city thinkers all appearing in that, really bemoaning the quality of Auckland's planning, its urban design. I also remember an article by Simon Wilson, who was the main writer for Metro magazine, Auckland's Shame, Urban Design. And by 2016, we had been acknowledged in the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize. By 2019, there were more cranes on Auckland's skyline than any city in the whole of the US. And by 2021, it had become the world's most livable city. From urban shame to global acclaim, it was a great journey, but it took time. And I've got all the photographs to show the changes. But I think that Aucklanders haven't seen all those photos. They don't know the change, because change sometimes people forget. Right. So anyway, that was a very long answer.
So if all you had to do was start and then hire 70 of the best people in the world, which is extraordinary, to do that.
It takes time.
Attract and
start
recruit
small
them.
And build. And
sure, yeah, and lead them and to be. Sorry. So another way of thinking about this, all one requires in order to achieve similar results is the ability to recruit 70 incredible people and attract them and recruit, maintain their enthusiasm and provide visionary leadership.
No.
Lead the entire thing out from a PR point of view. Those Auckland Conversations you mentioned before, I recall hundreds, maybe thousands of people in those
average about 400 people would turn up each time.
Well, the one that I was living out of town at the time, but I recall there was one that I was at which was extraordinarily well attended. There was a real energy in the room.
We had about 80 speakers and about 90,000 people came and listened.
And then,
so an average, that turns a certain average. But there were moments where I remember when we had Jeanette Sadiq Khan here from New York. She was the Commissioner for Transport for New York under Mayor Bloomberg. And I believe the numbers of about 2,100 people turned up to hear an engineer from New York talk about cities. And it was it put Auckland on the global map. I was being flown to Singapore to explain how we did it. To Stockholm with the United Nations were asking us, so how did you get from where you were to how you do? And it is about the people that you employ, and those people about developing up a strategy. And the strategy isn't about all the legislative levers only. You have to think about the non-legislative levers, fiscal, non-fiscal, and build this strategy, which was the urban design strategy, the urban design framework, and then you start and you begin and you start to move down the pipeline. And in the beginning, you have no political capital, you have no social capital. You have to build trust, and you do small things well, and you repeat them well, and you build the knowledge, and you build the story, and you get better at marketing and the storytelling, and you bring the city with you. And so everybody becomes a champion. And if everyone's a champion, they demand a better city. And that's what I believe Auckland has done. And it's been hit hard by COVID, and it needs to rebuild that sense of common spirit, that coalition of the willing, and find who those people are and rebuild that energy.
Is there a sense as well that maybe, that Auckland needs to get back to being in a place of becoming? Still, where it's not something that would that be a key kind of platform almost or plank that help build this, where there's a sense of that it's an unfinished project, that we're still it can be better tomorrow and so on.
Cities are never complete, Adam. They never finish. They're constantly evolving. That's what makes them exciting. That's why I work in that space. It's constantly evolving, constantly innovative. I don't know all the answers, and I travel around the world as a consultant now, as advising cities. I'm in Riyadh next week, doing a keynote at a big conference. Last week I was in Perth. Here I'm in Auckland. Cities are fascinating things. They're probably humankind's greatest invention, and they never static. And so it's about rebuilding, and absolutely. But I think there are tactics, and again, maybe we haven't had the time necessary today to talk about it. But there are clever tactics that you use, and I think that the tactics that Auckland used over many years was this idea that major events were also important milestones for a city. If you chase major events, you have deadlines, and public sector doesn't necessarily like deadlines. You say this has got to be done because we're hosting the Rugby World Cup in 2011, and no one's going to say, sorry, we're not going to do it on that day. People are coming. And so how do you get the city ready? And so I think that the chasing of the major events, the America's Cup, these are the moments where Auckland needs to think about, well, what's next? What does it chase? And how does it think about its global visibility around the world? Because cities are collaborating, Adam, on so many levels. We all share ideas, but they're ferociously competing. And they're competing for talent and investment. And if Auckland doesn't appear at the right places, at the right clubs, I mean clubs as in conventions, conferences, if it's not in the right cities talking to the right people, then people will ignore you and they will go and invest somewhere else. So Auckland does need to think about its next chapter, with the City Rail link, literally being upon us in early 2026, if not this year. I'm not sure the exact dates, but I describe that as fountains of people will come out of the ground and reactivate the central city like nothing could have done. It'll also reactivate Pukekohe because people can come in. It's never about the city centre. And so it's in a way, remember I talked about planting trees? The City Rail link is like planting the root system for a new city on which the trees will start to grow. And it'll be Takapuna, it'll be New Lynn. But without it, there just isn't the mobility and the access to the places that we need. We need to be able to get there, not just by driving, but by getting on a train. And so I think, well, what is Auckland's next chapter? What does it do with its waterfront? What does it do with a stadium conversation? What is the next event that it goes for? Expo, why don't we host expo, bring the world to Auckland, but give the city a deadline, because otherwise it just drifts. So
That's fascinating.
That's a tactic.
Right. Well, that almost seems like a key strategic lever.
It is. It's the greatest lever. That's why people build. That's why they bid for the Olympics. And I wouldn't say Auckland ever should, but that's why Brisbane has bid and has won the 2032 Olympics. They will achieve public realm infrastructure changes that would take 30 years. They'll do it all in 6 years. Barcelona, was probably the first Olympics that really thought about how do we use sport and the Olympic event as a catalyst for urban renewal and social upliftment. London did a great job. Sydney used it. They got the underground, they built the metro. All these things are city tactics.
So do you think that the mayors or the city leadership in these situations are bidding for the Olympics under the understanding that they're going to make a loss out of it? As I understand it, the Olympics these days typically are. But
interesting.
But in the idea that you're reinvigorating essentially the entire sort of public sector in order to get this done. Yeah. Do you think that that's quite explicit in their minds? I'd not heard that before.
Absolutely.
I thought it was just a prestige
I don't know.
thing.
I think there's a misconception around profit or whatever. How do you value value? How do you measure? You talked earlier about business cases and economic assessments of the cones, for instance. So I think we've got to get much better. And I don't think we capture half the value. I mean, we don't capture it. I'm saying we don't measure half the value that these projects create. We just think about numbers in very black and white terms. But the social capital of more children swimming, I mean, how do you value that?
Right.
More people using public transport. How do you put a value to that? It's almost invaluable.
Right.
Priceless, that's a better word.
Sure. So many occasions, public strategies are a document of sort of almost pro forma, and they might like a list of things that we want to do, perhaps. They're done because they're required, or maybe someone heard Ludo talking to Adam and, it's important, you need to have a strategy, you need to have a framework. How do you make that real? How do you harness actual, genuine, strategy, in order to achieve?
Think of cities as a business. I think they're the biggest business of all. They're actually the most complex of businesses. But how many cities have a business plan? How many cities have a strategy of how to achieve that business plan? How many cities actually have a KPI list that they actually measure and actually report back to the community on? And and I think that if I may say, I think Auckland Council, post amalgamation, is one of the poster card child cities for a long-term vision to be the world's most livable city. By 2021 it was achieved, but it was about alignment of 6 transformational shifts, some of the things that we weren't even responsible for. This was about an ambitious plan, and the Auckland Act, which allowed or created the super city, required us to prepare a long-term vision. And that long-term vision was led out, and at the time, thousands and thousands of people were involved in its creation. It had a team that was responsible for delivering, for implementing it, and the whole organisation was required to how to make the boat go faster. And I think that's how businesses think, and that's how I believe cities should think. And once they do that, they start to align those things, and everything then is about aligning to that vision, and you report back to the community on regular basis on how you are doing. And if the plan has to be changed, it's changed by the councillors through a particular process. But there needs to be a North Star. If you don't have a North Star, you end up in a constellation of mess.
Right.
And so that's what we did. And we had a North Star in terms of our urban design quality, what we desired. And we also had the long-term plan of the Auckland plan. So it was all trying to support a vision.
Right.
So that, in a way, tries to answer your question. But
leadership is critical, in other words.
At the political level, but at the officer level. And the things I've noticed over the years, if you think about different models, whether it be Medellin or whether it be New York or whether it be Singapore, they're all different models. But it's about the partnership between the politicians and the senior staff, the two must work together. And that's just in the organisation. What I talk about more recently is this idea of the public sector, Adam, cannot be expected to solve all the wicked problems of cities. They just don't have the skills, the innovation, the creativity, the education, the expertise. So the private sector, the academia, the community, bring them into the story, make them the partnership. That's the magic of cities, is when those four areas align and you get the capital from the private sector, the skills, the creativity. You bring that in-house and you use the partnership, the coalition, to drive the programs forward. And yet, I've been in public government roles. I have never met such a talented, hard-working group of people. But the pressure on them, the rigor on them is extraordinary. And working in the public sector is hard. And you're bound by certain criteria and scrutiny that you don't in the private sector. And so it's that harnessing of the partnership is the key. So that's how you do it. So, bring people with you.
Right. So coming back to that idea you mentioned earlier of utilising major events as a sort of strategic lever, what are some of the other... This is fascinating to me. Are there other
Absolutely.
Key things you're thinking, this is often missed. I never hear, but this is critical.
Oh, as in
we
terms
found
of a
this
tactic?
Useful. Well, yeah, a tactic, as you put it. Yeah.
Well, so
What else
yeah,
are we doing?
there's probably, I could name 10 things, but gosh, we could be here forever. But they're not the recipe.
No.
They're just things. You need leadership.
Yeah.
You need a political champion. You need somebody at the top of the political structure to lead, both vocally and politically, to lead, to build alliances, to build partnerships, to give you cover, to support. You then need a plan, and we've talked about this idea of a North Star, a focus, something that is greater than the sum of the parts. It's the sum of the parts, and where are we heading? Then you need a vision or a plan document that is full of the key platforms of where you're trying to go to. And I refer to the Auckland plan quite often. Those 6 transformational shifts were not just changes a little bit better than what was before, but they are transformational outcomes. We were talking about young Maori school leavers in the south of Auckland who left school, who couldn't read and write. That is something that the Auckland Council decided to put on its agenda for the Southern Initiative, was to lift education, but it wasn't our job only. So you have to build alliances with the federal governments or the national governments to bring those partnerships to bear. And that's what the Super City allowed us to do, because we were bigger. We weren't just 8 councils, we were 1. And so we brought people into the room that were struggling to know who to work with. We said, we're going to work with you. And so that the Southern Initiative was all about social procurement and about lifting Māori outcomes in that part of the south of Auckland. The central city was the second big idea, a world-class central city. That meant focus. We didn't say world-class New Lynn or Takapuna. We said a world-class city centre. What we need to now do is build those other parts, but you need money and you need time. But yeah, that's important. Then you need teams. You need to appoint the right people, bring the right skill sets. You need to have an education program. The Auckland Conversations became that. We did peer reviews of both public projects and private projects. And I was thinking about one of them was the design review panels. I don't know if you know much about those, but the public were really concerned about the quality of private development occurring in Auckland. And so we set up these urban design panels. Now, initially there was a sense of, oh gosh, not another bureaucratic hurdle to jump over. And people sort of tended to want to avoid getting peer reviewed. But by over the years, it became like a hallmark of quality to get peer reviewed by your peers. So private sector, top architects and engineers and landscape architects reviewing each other's work, everybody lifted. And what was really interesting, and what I thought was one of the key things for that program, was that we didn't choose the urban design panel members. We asked the private sector, we asked the Property Council, the Institute of Architects, the New Zealand Planning Institute. We said, nominate your best members. So you brought you brought their goodwill in by offering that opportunity. And so they were peer reviewing each other. And some days the panelists would appear in front of the panel because they were active developers or they were active architects. And so it lifted everybody. So there's a few things. I also think that we need to do small things and big things. You've got to work at different scales. So what are the tactical projects that you could seed the future today? So I've talked about 9 or 10 things there, I'm sure, in my list, but all that has to happen to create an energy of change and movement and, and then time. And the media, I think, that's why, in some respects, the work that you do with podcasts, lifting people's knowledge about things, the media are really powerful and can be really, really powerful allies in the war on bad cities, but to achieve better cities. And if you can engage the media, I remember my first week reaching out to the Herald when I got the job in Auckland High. I'm here. And it also authenticizes the bureaucracy, puts a face to the bureaucracy that's often faceless. And so we're here, we're all helping, we're all trying to improve Tamaki Makaurau. And I think it's one of my greatest achievements,
Sure.
Yeah, really proud.
So having an extraordinary level of ambition and then selling it again and again and again, really, would that both internally within the organization? Just as you were talking, I was thinking about design panels. I think there's perhaps a tendency there for them to become, as you put it, a bureaucratic hurdle. If there's a lack of that ambition for greatness and a lack of that being sold internally, that this isn't just a process here that we're doing for the sake of the process itself, but rather because this is about this, achieving this grand vision that we're all getting in behind, and then just coming back to that again and again and again. Would that sort of sum up?
That's a great way to describe it. And I think, as I said, rather than a decelerator, it was an accelerator of the city, because then they got more confident. We were proving better projects. The councillors were saying, wow, that's really good. What I found success, I remember one councillor saying, has the ADO looked at this? And someone said, yes, they have. And what did you do? And what did they say? If they've looked at it, I'm happy. Let's get on with it. Because I trust their opinion. Right. Not perfect, but better than not. But what they maybe didn't know that decision from the ADO or advice wasn't just the ADO. It was ADO plus the other officers across the organisation. We were just ended up being the conductor for some of that. Right. But we never did it by ourselves. We always asked our colleagues, and as I said, it's a team sport, and so that was brilliant. That made me success. And I remember, initially the urban design panel being somewhat cynical. Towards the end, they were all lining up to get on the panel because they wanted the peer review was almost like a rite of passage to delivering a great project, and then you see the product come out at the other end. But, it's important. Going back just one bit, we had something called the Capital Projects Design Review Panel. That sounds really exciting. But that was really about ensuring that what the council did and delivered met the same expectations we were requiring the private sector to do. And so I would say in the beginning, people were worried about, oh gosh, not another design lesson in design quality. But design is a strategic tool. It's not about the look, it's the feel and the function of a place. And what we found was that we were saving money on some projects. We felt that some projects didn't need to spend that much money on. They gold-plated the design. They could pare that back. But as long as it was high quality, it would last long. We just felt there were moments.
Some examples?
Well, I think sometimes you can over-design benches, and they can be different and too elegant and too complex and too expensive to maintain, and one-offs imported from Italy. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you've got to really think very carefully about the money you spend. It's so critical for us. And so some cases we would say, actually, that's not enough money being spent on that project. And we would be behind them to support the project managers in getting money and asking for money from the councillors, because we felt they needed to spend more. So in some instances, we saved millions of dollars on projects which we felt didn't need to happen in that particular way. And in some cases, we found projects that actually didn't get enough budget to achieve the outcomes they were talking about. And initially, a lot of the colleagues were sort of, oh gosh, not another hurdle. But what they realized very quickly, the project managers in particular, they spent a lot of their time running around the organization looking for support and ideas and consultation from their own colleagues. It takes them months. What we did when I was there was we pulled this team together where everybody was round the table and you present to us. Everybody that they wanted to consult with was in the room. It saved them 10 months. That costs money. 10 months of consultation, wait, the project gets delayed. It accelerated projects. And eventually they were lining up at my door to get reviewed because it was, again, I've been reviewed by the Auckland Design Office. The councillors would be happy. Some of the public would be happier. And we're moving forward. Built confidence in design rather than sort of bureaucracy of design.
Right.
Unleashed Auckland rather than held it back. It's strategic.
Sure. Yes. One of the things that I've noticed across the country, and I suspect this is also true of much of at least the English-speaking world, is that design takes time. Maybe you can save time. That's quite an interesting one. But wherever we're in some very tight loop where we've got a 3-year budgetary planning cycle, this long-term plan, we arrive in year one having just, scraped through the end of the previous financial year. We open up the books. What have we got going on this year? And we've got 12 months to design or scope, design, contract, build in some cases. I'm thinking here particularly of somewhat smaller scale projects in general, rather than big multi-year, gargantuan mega projects. But in those cases of those kind of relatively limited in scope projects, it often seems to me to be the design that gets squeezed because the build's going to take a certain length of time. Our procurement process is going to take a certain length of time. And in order to meet my KPIs, I'm going to need to have this, out by, let's say, end of August. Yeah. And so how did you deal with that? Was it just as a consequence, what you were saying before, of you were saving them time and that made it easy, or was there more that you were doing in order to get that design inserted earlier in the process?
Gosh, these are really complex questions because they're if they're you're really wanting to look into it. The journey of a project from an idea through to the implementation is only really just one part of the journey. The value of that project, it comes in the years and months and years ahead. The earlier you can get the urban design thinking in my view, is the earlier you can get the cross-disciplinary combination or conversation happening. What happens is they go off down this is the problem we're trying to solve, and then there's a bunch of people in a room trying to solve it, but they're not really collaborating with the multidisciplines. And so what we provided was as early on, the earlier you can influence the design at the briefing stage, at the business case, the better it took at the end, and we could not be so involved. And so initially when I asked the council when I first arrived, I would like sign off on capital projects before they go to the council, to ensure that the organisation this is the best version of it. I would like to see the projects before they're permitted, and I'd like to see them before they've gone through those stages. And it wasn't a very popular decision because it slowed things down. But if I was going to be the champion for the city, I needed some skin in the game. I couldn't champion a project I'd not had any involvement with. And so we shifted and we collaborated and we organised this programme of design review. And, as I said, towards the end, you were saving time, you were saving money, you were winning awards, you were building multidisciplinary teams, you were building relationships with other departments who perhaps were more antagonistic or bristly with us. And hopefully, towards the end, people who said, design is about aesthetics and beauty. It was nothing to do with that. It was about functionality and longevity and efficiency. All those words that people don't think urban design is about. They misunderstand what urban design is. It's actually form and function.
Right.
It's not about aesthetics. If it looks good, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But ultimately, it's about, does it work properly? Is it the right project? And we, as I said, some cases save millions of dollars. That money then could go into other projects, because sometimes people are over-scoping stuff. But it was just our view, it was our expert view, and it wasn't right or wrong. But we were asked and we were tasked to do that work. And as I said, I think eventually people began to really trust the input of the urban design team, and they would seek us out. That was partly a problem as well. There wasn't enough time to look at everybody and help everybody. There's just too much going on.
Right.
But you did your best, So
you from what it sounds like, you really started out as you meant to go on, in a way. That there were political or internal capital costs early on. You had faith, I suppose, that you were going to deliver value in the end, and that this would grow in its support and so on.
Right.
But rather than attempting to maybe build over the course of many years the sort of trust internally to be able to maybe ask for that thing, you just
on a couple of things,
get it out straight away. We're going to do this. It's going to cause some pain, and then it's going to deliver the benefit. You'll see the benefits later. Is that?
Yeah. Well, that was actually Auckland City Council. That was under Mayor Hubbard at the time. I was appointed to be the design champion. Well, of what? I didn't have a budget. I only had 3 or 4 people, but there was a team of 20 of urban designers across the organisation. So I had this virtual professional line manager. I wasn't their line manager, but I was their professional mentor.
Okay.
And so it built this collegiality. Then when we went through the restructure of the super city, there were urban designers from other councils. So we became this large team, and then we started recruiting and changing people around and built that credibility. But it did take time, Adam. I didn't. And then, you get disrupted by these changes. They're big disruptive things. Budget changes, rates rebates or rates increases or decreases. You've got to work within the framework you've got. And I think one of the things, I suppose, maybe as a reflection, is that what people don't know too much about is a lot of the central city projects were delivered with a targeted rate with a program. So it's a very, very smart idea which we deployed, which was a targeted rate on the central city business and residents, and that rate was over on top of the target over the rates of the city, and that was accruing about $22 million a year. That money had to be spent in the downtown. If that model was applied across the region, I think you'd start to see projects of the quality that we have talked about in the central city appearing across the city, and I've talked about this a lot to cities around the world. Melbourne, is also doesn't have that access to that type of targeted rate, but they have the ability, and so we're working to do that.
It's almost another example, in a subtle way perhaps, but of the kind of event, creating the expectation around the events, major events. In this case, because you're imposing additional rate tax on the relatively small group of people. Yeah. In doing so, you're making a promise to them, in effect, that you're going to deliver
sign in blood
X, Y, and Z, and then they're going to hold you to account for that, right? And hold your feet to the fire about it.
And you know what they are? They become your biggest champions. It's their money. It's not my money. It's not the council's. It's actually businesses' money. And we had a city centre advisory board or board that came together. They never made decisions, but they approved recommendations to the governing body. So it never went away from the councillors. It was all about the business, the best approach, and we made recommendations through formal reports up to the governing body, and they never went against the decisions of that, the recommendations of that board. That board had vice chancellor of the university, the chair of the property council, and so forth. So it was a really clever approach, but we went through the processes, the design, the options with them, and that's how we got the shared spaces over the line. I do remember the day where we proposed the shared spaces and this introduced the idea, and I talked about, I remember finding a picture of so the question was, how can a space that doesn't have the traffic signs and all the paraphernalia like
big
curbs,
tall curbs to keep the cars away from running people over
how
people's
are you
feet
going to
and so on.
guarantee the success? And what I just so luckily, I found this picture that I'd taken of a Christmas holiday. I think it was up north in a campsite. I said, why do children not get run over in a campsite? Why do we allow our children to go off for the entire day? There's big trucks, there's lorries, there's caravans. Why does everyone feel that that's a safe space? Because they are worried about doing the very thing, is knocking over a child or a child popping out. If cities and streets and the drivers were worried about knocking over somebody, they would be a lot more careful when they navigated through. And they went, wow. That makes a lot of sense. And I said also, I think New Zealanders and particularly Aucklanders are very democratic, very socially responsible people. I think it fits your psyche, sharing the space. And that, okay, let's do this. And the businesses supported it. And there were projects around the world that we used as benchmarks to say this is not a new idea. But the view at the time was that Auckland should pedestrianise its city. It's a very dangerous word, that word, because it means something very specific. Pedestrianise means pedestrian only. I never felt that Auckland was actually ready for a pedestrian only space because it doesn't have the numbers of people, the population to really keep that space alive, particularly at night. And sometimes I think there are places around the world which I've been to which are dead at night. And I think that cars are fine and they should be allowed in. Just drive carefully and put your lights on. And so it brings some life at night. And so I just didn't feel Auckland was ready. And I think the shared spaces goes back to your point about designing for context. I think those projects were designed for context. And there were parts of Auckland which weren't really ready that thought, oh, let's do that over here. It isn't appropriate everywhere. So I think that's what we brought with some rigor to decision making and trust from the councillors and the public eventually that we knew what we were doing and we had the best interests at heart for Auckland. And I guess there's proof is the projects that were built, and it's a deep honour to have been involved.
Well, that's a lovely sentiment, and we could finish it.
I mean it.
Yeah, I can tell. And we could finish it there, but there was one last thing I wanted to talk about, which is that you're just drawing on your experience in London. And one of the themes that we've touched on here is this idea of the modesty, providing the stage for people.
Yeah.
One of the things that's been trending a little bit on social media recently is the Victorian era design in London. And in particular, the level of attention and beauty and detail, attention to detail and beauty of everyday objects in London is perhaps quite striking. I'm thinking here alongside the Thames street lights that are kind of these whimsical fish things, beautiful. Down pipes that are kind of spewing some kind of little gargoyle thing.
That's right,
spilling out water whenever it rains, and the attention to the beauty in everyday or more what we think of as more mundane infrastructure like pump stations. And
Paris did it well with the metro stations and
Right, whereas it seems that you did advocate for something maybe slightly different here, and I think that's the results speak for themselves as far as Auckland's concerned in terms of what you've achieved. But I just wonder if you could comment on does New Zealand need to introduce a little bit more whimsy, or is there value in that we're maybe missing, that we now maybe that the stage has been presented? Is there room for more unusual things, for more attention paid to the cycleway racks and the?
I see what you're saying. I don't think we can afford it. To be honest, I think we need to be really careful that we don't buy off the shelf ideas and from other places. I've always felt that Auckland needed to tread its own path, learn from the mistakes of other cities, but also not to design everything anew, think about what's going to last. And I feel that London at that time, that the amount of money that was spent on those sorts of those more
centre of empire at the time.
At the time of the world. And I felt that if I went down a Europeanization of the city, I wouldn't last very long here, because it was applying a different aesthetic, a different ideology, a different. There were some elements that look at the Britomart building, how beautiful that is in terms of the restoration of that, some of the wonderful Victorian. But I felt that New Zealand was stepping into a different stage, and particularly what triggered me early on was meeting mana whenua and Māori within Auckland, and particularly Ngāti Whātua and others who came and saw me early on and said, we don't see our faces in the other places. We don't feel at home as well as we might in the urban city, and we want to see our faces in the places, and I don't know what that meant, and really, because who am I to. So we asked, and what we did was we set up an Indigenous urban design program, urban design team within the Auckland Design Office, and we recruited Māori designers to start to think about how you apply that thinking, that aesthetic, that sense of place, because it's a unique point of difference in the world. We could be anywhere in the world unless we're somewhere else, and Auckland and New Zealand, its indigenous story is globally relevant, but if you're not careful, you don't portray that properly. And so this is a Pacific city. And what is a Pacific city? And I think what we're developing is a real unique sense of Pacific urbanism, which is really unique to place. And it's not about London and copying Paris, but learning some of the tools. And so we set up a program which you may not have heard about called the Tiaranga Design Principles. And those Tiaranga Design Principles were all about applying, kaitiakitanga principles, custodianship, celebration, miharo, beautiful. It was all about that. And those projects now are being revealed because those principles have been applied to all the capital projects. You see them, look at the artworks, you start to see it in the streetscapes. It's both subtle and obvious. And so, walk around the waterfront and you see all the small little indentations in the paving. That's shellfish. It's talking about the past and reflecting into the future. And that is one of my proudest moments, really, I believe, is setting up that program, achieving the Tiaranga principles. And in 30 years' time, this city will be a Pacific city powerhouse, and it will be unique to its own place and its own identity, and not a copy of England or a copy of San Francisco, but somewhere, because people are looking for unique experiences, and Auckland, New Zealand has a real chance to lead the world in that. And I think we've got this leadership space, Indigenous urbanism, Pacific urbanism, and I think it's something to sing from the rooftops. So I hope that answers your question.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so it's almost the same kind of strategic idea almost, but a totally different expression of those values, of that, of the aesthetic interests and so on. That you're talking about beauty and very minor things in pressed shellfish and stone.
Subtle. It's subtle.
Mm.
It's also not bravado. And I go back to the comments I made earlier.
Thing.
Yeah, modesty, humbleness, so forth. But I'm happy to champion things and to promote. But there's a difference between arrogance and confidence. They're very different things. And one promotes confidence, hopefully, and I sing when things are done well, and I will critique when things are not done. That was my job. But I think that there's a story that's emerging, Adam, about the Pacific urbanism, and I don't think people fully understand that yet. If you go down to the waterfront and look at the downtown program right in front of the commercial bay, that space there are mussel beds, there are mussel ladders that are there. That wasn't a Ludo and ADO idea. That was mana whenua.
Right.
And we brought them in and we said, how do we clean the harbour? How do we heal the harbour? That was their idea. So, those are
Lovely.
Bringing them into the tent early, not at the end as some piece of public art, but actually what are the basic ingredients of what this place is going to become. And if you want to get into it, Go down there and start to research the stories about why those decisions were made, because they are all based on that sense of heal, that sense of looking after a place. So I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's really important. And in time, it'll be everywhere. At the moment, it's still early days because it takes hundreds of years to change a city, but it's coming. But
almost, I mean, even though we might express it in terms of te reo Māori at the end here, there's a very consistent theme throughout of a very close attention to place, both in the microscopic or the small scale of a shellfish, but more generally, what is this place? It's near the harbour. How do we kind of, open that space up to people, to more generally here at the bottom of the South Pacific.
On the global stage. I've heard people talk about, New Zealand being the last bus stop on Earth. It's not a helpful strategy for an economic strategy. It's, how about the first bus stop on Earth? We're the first country that wakes up in the morning, for crying out loud. Imagine the latest urban design innovation or the latest business creation. It's launched in New Zealand because it sees the light before the rest of the world. In fact, we work while you sleep. It's an economic opportunity. We're not far away, we're near because of our technology. All these things, it's about reframing. We're 8 hours from half of the world's population in Asia. We're not wedded to Mother England anymore. Let's face to the northwest, to the Asia Pacific. We're right in the middle of we're in the middle of the game, not at the edge of the earth. We're right in the epicenter of it. It just requires a change, and I think that's what
raising our level of ambition.
Absolutely,
it
could be the greatest country on earth. Is in my.
All right. Hey, look, we'll have to leave it there. But Ludo, thanks so much for speaking with me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on board.
Cheers.